I'm Sean Halsall, and this is What's Left. Hi everyone, welcome back to What's Left, and without further ado, I'll introduce my co-host, Renee Barnett. Hi Renee.
Hi everyone.
George White.
Hi.
How you doing, George? And new to the What's Left team, although not completely new to What's Left, Laura Brogan. Hi Laura.
Hi.
So it's been a little while. How's everyone doing?
Great.
Doing all right?
Yeah, lots been going on.
Oh my
Hopefully,
goodness. I need a vacation.
Yeah, not been doing so bad. Managed to get through the summer.
Just about clinging on. We were doing the school holidays as well, like, come on, September.
Right, yeah.
So loads to talk about this evening. Obviously, been away for a little while, and that'll become apparent once we cover some of the topics we're going to look at. But yeah, so I know, Laura, you were mentioning earlier something about women's rights in Afghanistan.
Yeah, so probably as a lot of people have seen over the last couple of weeks, and so it started really back in 2021. I think a lot of the laws started to change in Afghanistan regarding women and what they were able to do sort of publicly. But more recently, we're seeing that women are not allowed to use their voices in public, not allowed to, do any sort of singing or anything like that. You might have seen some of the movement online. Where a lot of Afghan women and other people supporting them are removing their hijab and singing as an act of defiance, really. So that's something that I've been seeing a lot of going on. That's quite worrying. Particularly as somebody who would call themselves an activist and want to help people who are in an oppressed position. It's quite, it's concerning and worrying. And how do we help? What can we do that's beneficial?
It's really
go ahead. Sorry.
It's really something that's of interest, where because Afghanistan had largely opened up, there were girls were able to go to school for the first time. Women were able to go out without male chaperones, which was something that happened under the Taliban the first time round. And yet, presumably, if families were sending their children to school, they believed in it. So how does it change? How does that mindset change when only the top changes, only the governing regime changes? So have those people's minds changed, or are they just in fear and then just kowtowing to what the prevalent regime is saying at the time?
That's it. I don't know if you saw Edinburgh University accepted a cohort of women from Afghanistan that were studying medicine. That obviously they're no longer allowed to go and study. So Edinburgh welcomed a cohort of women across there. But exactly, it's changed so quickly and been enforced so quickly. It is like you say, is it just people are sort of living in fear of being defiant of what's been said, or has there been an attitude change? I'm not sure what the answer is to that.
I don't believe there was an attitude change. I think that it was just a forced action, and you were talking about the women that are defying that. Now, what have you seen? Because I haven't actually seen that part of it. What have you seen in terms of the backlash from what they're doing? What is the government or whoever, the church or the mosque they're doing? when women are disobeying the orders.
So I'm not sure specifically on the back of what's, on the back of this sort of online movement, if there's been sort of any repercussions to that. But I know as part of what's been going on, where, shelters where women who were escaping domestic violence have been closed, and those women have actually been relocated to prison that were in those domestic violence shelters. So I can't imagine that any repercussion, that anything favourable will come of, any realisation of what people are doing online is in defying these new legislations and laws.
Yeah. I mean, I just feel like such a reaction right now around the world from this group of men, this faction of men. Certainly not every man, not even close, but to turn back the clock and resubjugate women. I mean, here, of course, and we don't have to get into that into United States much, but of course, not only have they, taken away abortion rights here, but they're also wanting to outlaw contraception. I mean, that's just crazy, but it's like, what is it about? Well, I mean, I guess it's a power thing, obviously. What is it about, some men that feel like they want to prove somehow that women are less than?
Mm-hmm. I think
What
it's
are they-
interesting. Sorry.
Are they afraid, or is it fear? I'm sorry, Laura. Didn't mean to
No,
step
you're
on
okay.
you.
What I was going to say was it's interesting to come in with that, because I know we, aside from what's happening in Afghanistan, on a global level at the moment, we're seeing sort of a resurgence of a large group of men across the world that are sort of coming together to try and wind things back, to get women in a more domesticated, less educated, seen a lot of things about, women that are graduating, and if you look at some of the comments on those from some men, and it's like, oh well, they'll be getting divorced soon, or I think it's that thing of not needing reliance upon men anymore and being more emancipated and more independent, that some men are seen as a bit of a threat. But obviously what's happening in Afghanistan is a really really extreme end of the spectrum of what's going on. But we are seeing this sort of movement of men that are, and again, not all men, but we are seeing a resurgence of men trying to push things back and sort of put women back in a certain box or certain pigeonhole.
Yeah, I was on some training the other day, and there was one of the TUC education tutors, a brilliant woman from the Southwest, had delivered a presentation on the patriarchy and stuff. And well, yeah, most of these people, your Andrew Tates of the world and stuff, pushing this narrative are absolutely a massive issue. I think there was a study done in America where now, for the first time, a lot of young women, I'm not sure if it's quite a majority yet, but a lot of young women think equality for women's gone too far. Mm-hmm. So if we're in a state where women believe equality's gone too far for themselves, what does that say about society and how our education systems are working and how the media is influencing people and these influencers online, like your Andrew Tates and others like him?
Women? I'm sorry. You do hear women commenting on, I don't think we should have a woman president because women are too emotional.
Yeah,
and it's hello.
And I think there's enormous amounts of money being put into this as well. Particularly women's bodily autonomy things are getting enormous amounts of money put in. Things like in going back to Afghanistan, things like the the ideas that are getting pushed there, which have come out of Wahhabi Islam and been imported into Afghanistan, which have been sent out of the Middle East using oil money. There's huge amounts of money being put into suppression of, well, not just suppression of women, but suppression of any kind of open, free expressions,
Yeah, I mean, I'm just looking at some stats here. And so in America, all adults, 56% of all adults think women have it easier in society. And even amongst women, that's still 54%. So that says...
How could that be?
And I think, again, it's clearly not true, because we clearly see gender pay gaps and access to healthcare and stuff in some states in America not being equal, clearly. But I think the media and these influencers...
The pay thing, and generally, at least in this country, when a couple gets divorced, generally the kids stay with the mom. So you got the mom who's taking care of the kids and working because she has to. They won't have enough. So how could anyone think that would be easier? I don't know, but it's all in the mind.
Yeah,
and there's a lot of people like Russia and China and Iran that are just constantly stirring the pot, and we're falling for it every time. We're
I'm not sure I buy that. I was going to say, I'm not sure I quite buy that it's foreign influences stirring the pot. I think it's absolutely in-house, and it's capital stirring the pot, because capital needs the free labour of women to stay at home and sort of mind the kids to make sure men can go out and work.
It's in-house, but it's also, at the delight of some people like Vladimir Putin, because his whole thing is just to sow chaos. And if you think there was no Russian interference in our last couple of elections, I have a bridge I'd like to sell you in Brooklyn.
I don't doubt that, but I'd argue, find me one election around the world where America haven't interfered with, and I'll say, let's say, in bridge back. But
I'm not saying that it's good, so we should go interfere with other people. Just if somebody else murders someone else, I'm not going to go murder somebody just because I want to be on their level.
No, I think
it's not right, no matter who does it.
No, absolutely, but I think we in the West tend to overlook the misdeeds of our own governments and leaders at times, and I think always pointing to the boogeyman in the East or Middle East isn't that helpful. I think the boogeyman's capital. We know that capitalism and free market neoliberalism is the problem. That's what causes almost all of our problems in society. That's what's led to a crumbling NHS in the UK, bad healthcare systems in America, where you can go into massive debts for just getting cancer. All around Europe, it's stagnating wages and sort of the erosion of workers' rights globally. I think this is all, the finger can be pointed at capital. I don't think there's any one state or state actor that's to blame. It is the economic system we've thrust upon ourselves to make a few people very, very rich.
Well, just with that, Sean, the tie-up between, I think the article that I read the other day was that global population growth is shrinking, perhaps it is even arrested and will be declining, or will be in short order. And as you know, where capitalism requires there to move into new markets and seek out new sources of labor, well, in a shrinking, I don't think, well, we certainly haven't ever seen how capitalism interacts with a shrinking global population, and I think that then is converging with the seeking to take away women's bodily autonomy, because then they can force population growth if they remove women's choice from the equation.
Absolutely. So also
So-
since we've last, sorry, Laura, go on.
So sorry, it's interesting sort of bringing capitalism back into that discussion, because one thing that I was going to say, coming back to those statistics that you read out about people thinking that women have it easier, I think a lot of that, even though women do take on the greatest amount of domestic labor and emotional labor within families, I think that is so undervalued. And it's not seen as, because it's not bringing any money in, it's not seen as profit generating, it's not producing anything, so it's so devalued that people don't en masse think that that is a value, and that women who are stay at home wives or mothers or homemakers, whatever label you want to put on that, are seen as having a bit of a jolly, really, and having things nice and easy. Or in the workplace, women who might not be able to stay after hours because they've got to go, their colleagues are staying later, working away, but your female colleagues got to go off because they've got to go and do a school run, then they've got to cook for their family, then they've got to do the homework, put their kids to bed, but they're seen as, oh, they're getting off. They're seen as a lot lower value than those people who will stick behind and carry on working, because that domestic labor isn't valued as much in in our societies.
Absolutely.
It's funny how that goes, because I mean, it's probably one of the most important jobs that you could have, is to prepare future citizens, because the children of today are the ones who are going to be in charge tomorrow. So who do we want, preparing these kids? And that's a very, very important job. And I think if a woman and a family agrees that, one parent needs to stay home and take care of the kids and all that, there's nothing wrong with that. And I don't see anything wrong if people have plenty of money, they don't need a second income, and the woman chooses to stay home. I know someone I just spoke with yesterday, and it's the husband that is staying home because the wife had the better position, made the most money. So he's like taking care of the baby. And if people decide that's what works for them and they want to do that, then that's fine. But I'm seeing a push toward having that be the only valid thing that women can do, is, turn out those babies and take care of them and cater to their husbands and that sort of thing. But it's not widely popular with women, thank goodness.
No, it's such a destructive message, isn't it? It just is sort of tearing apart even further the fabric of our society and how we structure communities and stuff. And yeah, it's just, for me, back to capital trying to extract every last bit of value from us, whether that's paid value or not paid, in
Right.
task you spoke about there, which frees up other people to get paid and generate stuff for economies. It's mad. But I was going to say, we'll move on to the next topic we were talking about. So since we were last recorded, we've had an election in the UK. The Labour Party won.
Seems like ages ago now. So much has happened in the world since then.
It does, but I've still got a hall full of leaflets, so from our campaigning.
For you, for sure, absolutely.
So, for all those listening, I obviously didn't win, so I'm not an MP, but we put in a good campaign. And just a quick shout out to all the people who worked on my campaign. I cannot thank everyone enough for the help, support, and many hours of delivering leaflets and pounding the pavements for me. My heart goes out to all of you. But yeah, so we saw the Labour Party win a massive majority on quite a relatively small vote share. So 30% of people who cast a vote voted for Labour. I think from the population of the country, it's about 1 in 5, 20% of the people actually voted for the government that's now got a huge majority sort of spend the next few years plowing through legislation as they see fit. So, what are your thoughts on the general election, George, and what's happened since?
Well, just on the election itself, where I think it's certainly been spun as it being the great landslide, and I suppose in number of MPs, it probably has reflected quite a sizable majority in Parliament, but to me it seems such a thin, such a top veneer of success, because I think like you mentioned about the percentage of the vote that got them that majority, and if you just in sort of broad brushstrokes mathematics add together the Tory vote and the Reform UK vote, you get to somewhere comparable. So it doesn't take a genius to work out what I think is going to come next. And then also with that sort of slim veneer there, I don't think they've then sprung straight into government and tried to enact policies that are going to strengthen their electoral chances. I can't see exactly where there are any votes in taking away the winter fuel allowance for pensioners.
Yeah, raising pensions, I was a vote winner.
And other things that they've done, which just seem to me to be relatively meager in terms of this stated aim of balancing the books, and don't seem to please anybody. So I can't see them being either clever electoral tools or fiscally doing what they have espoused to want to do.
Yeah, I either read or heard somewhere it described as Labour's loveless landslide, which I think rolls quite nicely off the tongue and does what it says on the tin. I think, yeah, it's the Tories lost the election rather than Labour gaining it. What's interesting is when you look at the amount of votes they got compared to 2019, which I think was Labour got about 500,000 more votes in 2019, and 2017, where it was 3 million almost more votes. And still they'll look back on as terrible disasters for the Labour Party. 2017, not so much. The current sort of liberal press and Labour Party tend to just ignore that election ever happened. But 2019, certainly, where you're getting 500,000 more votes and it's seen as a catastrophe and the biggest disaster since the war or something. It's wild how they frame these election wins and sort of ignore the mass mobilisation that the 2017 manifesto inspired in activists up and down the country, and young people engage a generation of people in politics that sadly now seems to have melted away with no natural home.
You know, from afar across the pond over here, looking at the UK election, it feels like it's a different Labour Party than, say, the Jeremy Corbyn Labour Party. It feels like it's slid, to the right. And in a way, I wonder whether that's the only reason that, Labour won and people voted for Keir Starmer, because to me, just to hear him speak for the most part and see him and sort of how he comports himself and everything, I would never peg him for a Labour person. I would definitely peg him as a Tory. But of course, you guys have much more in-depth knowledge about both parties, so you would probably not make that mistake. But from where I'm sitting, it's like, they won, but what did they win?
Yeah, I completely agree with you, Renee. I think we've seen, and I mean, it's been a banner that Keir's been waving for the last couple of years, is that for a changed Labour Party. It's the new Labour Party, and it has changed and come away from those traditional Labour Party values that we would see. And we're seeing that in some of the legislation that George commented on before, like, you know, taking the winter fuel allowance away from elderly people that require it, or, you know, tightening who will get it. Also, this, I think it's this week, we've seen Angela Rayner come out and say that she wouldn't be averse to taking away the single person's discount for council tax. So if you're a family with just one adult, you get a discount on your council tax, which is usually, it's quite a hefty bill. So you get a discount of, I think it's about a quarter. So it doesn't really, you know, reflect the fact that it's half, you're getting half the amount of income. And a lot of the other sort of legislations or things that they've refused to act on, like the 2-child cap of benefits for families for more, you know, with more than 2 children, are sort of not, they're not helping the people that a Labour Party would traditionally, you know, help or support. And we're all being told, oh, you know, the Labour Party inherited this terrible fiscal position, and that we all need to tighten our belts and, you know, go shoulder to shoulder, you know, take it on our backs. And somehow the poorest in society seem to be deemed that they have the broadest shoulders to shoulder this weight of, you know, the terrible state of the economy. And again, people who are more well off, people in big business, are not seeing the same sort of impact on themselves that, you know, working class people are. So I think you're completely right when I wouldn't peg the Labour Party as it stands now as a traditional Labour Party either. And I think that's to have, you know, sort of scooped up some votes for people who wouldn't deem themselves as far right as the Tory party were during their campaign, or they wouldn't peg themselves as a reform voter. So Labour have moved further to the right to scoop those votes up, but it leaves a lot of people in a much more precarious situation.
Yeah, I think a couple of points on that as well. The 2-child benefit cap's an interesting one, because as well as it just being morally abhorrent to sort of drive kids into poverty for no fault of their own, where we were talking earlier, George, about the fall in birth rate globally. If you want to have people having more kids, then you have to make it financially viable for them to be able to feed the kids and keep a roof over people's head. Now, driving kids into poverty and families into poverty for having more kids seems a bit of a backwards policy if you want to drive up the birth rate and ensure there are people coming down the line after us to pay for our pensions when we get there and ensure there's an economy that's viable. Otherwise, you're going to be relying on hoping there's a lot of immigration with how the sort of current political outlook in Europe is, where the far right are whipping that up. Good luck convincing anyone to come to a country where it looks from the outside that a bunch of people hate you and don't want you here, are mad racists. It doesn't seem like they've really done the sums on this and thought, how are we going to make sure that in 20, 30 years' time, the economy is afloat?
Mm-hmm.
And just to pick that one up as well, Sean, that in South Korea, where they have one of the most acute demographic declines in the world, there's actually some kind of a movement amongst women there who have disengaged from the idea of having kids and are sort of actively rejecting that idea and basically saying there's nothing in it for us, there's no benefit in this, and that is directly, my view anyway, that is directly a result of capitalism and the the mining of a particular resource, in this case, reproduction.
Yeah, so my little sister lives in South Korea, so it's something I have a little bit of knowledge on. And the state there pays massively if you have a child, and certain counties or whatever they call them, districts over there, pay more. So people will move around and follow where the money is. So my sister's got 3 kids over there, which is super abnormal in Korea. It's usually 1 kid and that's it. So that's a massive family she's got there. So yeah, it is interesting how far the state are going as well, and doing things in the opposite way, like actively financially supporting people, giving people money to have children. Where here you're taking it away. I think another thing that stood out with this Labour government, and we've just seen it in the last week, is how are we going to expect this government to look after renters when Jazz Afrol, I believe his name is, the MP who's been found to be a slum landlord this week with sort of 15 properties infested with ants and moles everywhere. How are these people ever going to legislate on the side of the majority of younger people in this country who are stuck in rented accommodation, when we've got these people who are making the decisions and aren't ever going to sort of go in the favour of the people, which would cost them money if they had a few rights? It's interesting. And he sits in a seat where previously it was Sam Tarry who was sort of removed, and then some shenanigans apparently happened during the selection process. But he was one of the MPs in the cabinet, Renee, who went and stood in a picket line. So Starmer threw out of the shadow cabinet at the time, and then subsequently he got removed to be replaced by the UK Parliament's largest landlord, private landlord. I think that demonstrates exactly the problem with the Labour Party in the UK.
Oh,
It was touched on just a few minutes ago as well, that the two child cap, and there was, I think it was an SNP motion that was put forwards, and I think 7 of the Labour MPs voted in favour of that motion and had the whip removed. And again, it just seems absolutely against the traditions of the Labour Party to take that stance on that issue.
Yeah, and then again, they won't remove the whip from this slum landlord who's ended up in The Guardian all over BBC News because of his practices with how he chooses to make money. And it was an amendment to the King's Speech, wasn't it, where the SNP moved and them 7 MPs voted with a conscience, which is if I'd have been there and I'd have been in that shade of political persuasion still, then I would have been right alongside them. There's no way I could find it in my conscience to vote to keep kids in poverty. And it's such a small figure as well. I've seen the numbers to raise, I think it's something like 700,000 kids out of poverty is 1.5 billion, which in the grand scheme of a national budget is minuscule, and would probably long term save a lot more money in health conditions as the kids get older, in better educational outcomes because kids aren't going to school hungry, and all these sort of things. I just think it's so short sighted.
Mm-hmm.
And going back to the demographics thing, literally helps encourage people to have more kids. I don't know.
Absolutely.
I don't know. It's crazy, but there's such a disparity. I mean, obviously, what is it? 90% of the world's wealth is owned by 1% of the people. It makes no sense. It's French Revolution time, baby. I mean,
well, speaking of revolution, and we've been speaking about, the results of that election, the Labour Party getting in on such a small mandate of the population. How do we go about, reforming these voter institutions, the processes of electoral, of elections, to a different system that is going to give people more of a chance to vote for somebody who will, stand up for the people they're meant to be representing, the communities, to give people a real chance of change. Because we saw it here in the UK election, and I know there's a lot of the same rhetoric currently in the US election, that a vote for somebody else is a vote for. So we were told over here, vote for anybody else apart from Labour is a vote for the Tories. And I know there's a lot of similar conversation going on in the US. So how do we sort of empower people that they can vote with their true morals and feelings and values? How do we go about changing that so that people can do that?
In the case of the United States, I think it might be a good idea to preclude convicted felons of running for office. And then, you might have a bigger chance of being able to move around the board a little bit better. But I think there has to be some kind of standards set, at least in this country. Now, I'm curious, what kind of turnout did UKIP get? What was the percentage of the vote?
UKIP are long gone now, so it turned into the Brexit Party and then this last election Reform Party.
The Reform Party, that's what I'm calling it, UKIP.
So
Nigel Farage. Is that who Nigel Farage is, the Reform Party?
Yeah, he is.
Yeah, Nigel Farage. So in the seats I'm in and stood in, they got about 7,000 votes, which would be about 14% of the vote share. And apparently, nationally, it was about replicated 14.3% of the vote share nationally. So,
I mean, that's a substantial amount. Certainly a number like that could throw an election one way or another.
When the Labour Party, who returned 412 seats out of the 650, did that with 33.7% share of the vote, and 14% is massive.
Yes,
and it highlights the problems in the electoral system, where sort of like just over the same votes again, one party gets 5 seats and the other gets 412. It kind of shows there's something not quite working in the democratic structures.
But it also shows as well, Sean, that it wouldn't necessarily be to the advantage of progressive politics, or not simply to the advantage of progressive politics. It would also allow in, for example, reform, but it would even allow in parties to pick up votes who were even more to the right, actual fascist parties even.
Yeah, and I think though that's where it raises the case that it's the left's job to counter that, to actually tell a story of people's material conditions being improved and stuff, not just empty rhetoric. So, I mean, personally, we spoke about earlier, the Labour Party sort of scooting off to the right, following the Tories and sort of following that shift in the Overton window. I think now more than ever is the time for a new left-wing party in the UK, to the left of Labour, filling that position and actually talking about anti-austerity politics, the sort of stuff that infused so many people in 2017. I think there's a massive appetite for that, more so probably now than even in 2017. I think the world's a very different place post-COVID. I think post-Brexit settling in and stuff, I think now's the time for a proper, real left-wing narrative to be told around the economy, around how we treat each other, just a bit of, let's start treating each other like humans rather than maligning certain groups of people and using them as political footballs. I think we saw that a few weeks ago in the town I was born and raised in Southport, with the absolutely brutal murder of the 3 little girls in the dance class, and then the subsequent sort of far right spreading misinformation, and then we saw the riots kick off that I'm sure everyone's heard about. It was sort of put Southport into the global spotlight. So what did you hear about over in the States, Renee, with regard to
I'm probably a little bit more plugged in to UK news and politics than the average bear here, because I have so many good friends and associates there. But definitely it looked really bad. It looked really, really bad. And of course, in the beginning, when when they sort of co-opted the murder of those little girls as their excuse for going to the streets and and protesting and rioting, whatever they were doing. It was pretty bad. And then so a lot of people, of course, were saying, yeah, on this side. And then, of course, it comes out later, but doesn't quite hit with as big of a punch that, okay, well, he wasn't an immigrant, and okay, he wasn't Muslim, he was actually Christian, but sort of that message is kind of muted afterwards. So I'm sure there are a lot of people here that still think that it was about a Muslim immigrant murdering 3 little precious white children. I mean, it's a horrific thing, no matter what the cause of it, but it's an even bigger shame that those little girls and their families were used to justify that level of violence.
Yeah, and I think one of the really sad things is that the families were then forced to come out and condemn the violence and tell people not to come in our name. And I can't imagine how difficult that is when you're grieving just a few days earlier the loss of your little kids. I can't begin to imagine sort of that grief. On top of it, then you're then forced to go out and tell these absolute thugs that they're not doing it in your name. It's stuff that's just not needed. I mean, the town, thankfully, obviously both myself and Laura live in Southport. So we'd gone down to the site of the riot the morning after to help the clear up. We got there about 8:30. And the street was already pretty much spotless again. The community had just come out in droves to clean up, rebuild the walls in front of people's houses in the mosque, and sort of wrap their arms around each other. And that, to me, signifies what Southport's about. And I think because of that response, the far right just didn't come back to Southport. We didn't see anything else again. Right. And I think that's how we've got to react to these. We show them that they will not break the communities, and the community will stand against them. And if you want to come and wreck things, we just rebuild against them when they're gone. They won't break our communities.
Yeah. That was wonderful when people did show their support and also their opposition to that kind of behavior. Now, this may be switching a little bit, but you know how I do. But what about the election in Germany this week, where they elected some super far right person for the first time in long time? There are you
the AFD in Thuringia, is it? Yeah. I think I don't think it even is a stretch. I think they literally are a fascist party. Are they not a neo-fascist party? And it's I think it's taken everybody by surprise, including including Olaf Scholz, hasn't it?
Yeah.
Yes.
It's terrifying. And again, we get stuck often in looking at these things through the prism of our own countries. I think this is a global phenomenon. And to be honest, we shouldn't be surprised, because the far right tend to do well when there's economic downturns and economies aren't working for working people. The fascists absolutely make hay. And that's why it's so important there is a sort of left-wing, socially left, and more importantly, economically left-wing ideas talked about and discussed, and that void's filled, and people have a genuine option. Because I think if you let centrist liberals just run amok, then fascists will absolutely point to the fact that these people are not delivering for anyone apart from the wealthy.
That's completely, and like you say, with the centrist parties that we see again, like across the globe in the recent elections, they're backing away from talking about the issues that are affecting working class people. So while they're not talking about these issues and pandering to big business and the like, and to capital, that we are seeing these fascist parties, fascist people coming up saying, "Oh, what your housing needs are not being met. You're not earning enough. you can't feed your family properly, that is because this person that you probably work alongside or that you see on the school run is coming over here from another country and taking those resources. And it's an easier idea for people to get their head around that actually, oh, so this person is coming taking up a bit of the country's resources, rather than what might seem quite an abstract idea that actually it is due to exploitation from businesses, workers' rights not being robust enough to protect people, that mean that people can't earn a big, a good enough wage. And I think they use that it's an easier, simpler idea to blame another person who's also in a shit position, just like you are, who also is struggling to make ends meet, who's also struggling to feed their family, get them in a good school, get a good job. It's easier to blame that person than it is to think, about some maybe more complex ideas and lay the blame where it actually should be. And you're right, they are sort of what's the word that I'm looking for? Sorry. They are completely getting all these votes on the back of using that rhetoric.
Yeah.
I think what the AFD have done as well, it isn't just the rhetoric. They also set up summer camps and support groups and stuff. So they are filling needs that the state isn't meeting. And once you've got people in these summer camps and stuff, good luck having them coming out with an actual open mind if they've been stuck in summer listening to someone from the AFD and the headbanging racism. As well as I'm pretty sure I've read somewhere that a lot of the divide in East Germany, there's a lot of divide over the war in Russia and Ukraine, with sort of East Germans and the sort of being much closer to the Soviet era Russia, don't view Moscow as much of a threat as people in West Germany, and obviously under the NATO sort of controlled West Germany. So I think that's as well. I think it's a bit deeper than what the divides that we'd see in the UK or the United States, but still it is very worrying to see these far right parties exploit the positions very, very well, and sort of the centrists not have an answer for that.
Well, I'm to see the centrists' response to it as well, and the response isn't to then start to seek to solve people's problems, to properly fund schools and hospitals and all the things that people have a grievance about, but it's to then sort of ignore those facts, keep doing some more of that, some more of the same, some more austerity in more cases than not. But it just seems that, I don't know, perhaps they would prefer to allow the far right to rise than to actually tackle the systemic problems that people are facing, that are allowing the far right to come in with a scapegoat to blame.
Well, we saw it with what happened. Sorry, going back to what Sean was saying about in Southport, that we, whilst we'd had the riot that occurred after the vigil. So at the vigil, we went to the vigil. That the community came out. It was a massive outpouring of the community, a massive turnout, and there were groups of, like, say, between 20 and 40 years of age, men coming draped in St George's flags, with crates of cider, just sitting at the vigil, getting drunk, draped in a flag. So I actually ended up having my a video of me spreading around on fascist side of TikTok, because I asked some of these men to take the flags off, because it's not the time. The organisers of it had said that they didn't want flags to be there. It wasn't about any political message. It wasn't about any any other message apart from we're coming to support these families. But in the condemning of those riots that followed that vigil, in the condemning of that, we saw local politicians and then politicians, from nationally coming out, and not one of them in the original sort of in the follow up would condemn them as far right. People with a far right angle that were coming out, or that these were anti-Islamic. We had our local MP here say that it was an attack on local business and a list of other people before mentioning that it was an attack on the mosque and Islamic community here. And I think what you're saying is right. There is a reluctance to come out and say, to call this as far-right violence, far-right hate that we're seeing being spread across. And is that to downplay it? Is it to completely ignore it? Or is, like you said, then you don't have to deal with those systemic issues that bring us to a position where the far right have got an opportunity to get in and have those conversations and to get people on board.
Not to forget as well that these very same people, it's not just anti-immigrant or it's not just racist, but these are the same people. What are their views on women's rights? Yeah. What are their views on trade union rights? What are their views on socialists? These are we know what fascists are. We know where this ends up. And the pastor Niemöller even wrote a poem about it.
But to your point about about women's rights and how they feel about women's rights, I wonder, I don't know. I guess I just don't get why any women at all would gravitate toward that side of things. But we do have women that are on the right. I really don't.
I think it's very much the same as well. How none of us could really imagine how anyone could join a cult. I think it's a similar sort of logic to that, where people would end up coming into doing things that are clearly against their own interest, but what they see as a greater good and a grandeur sort of myth in their own heads and stuff. I think, they've been missold something in this idea of grandeur and a greater good and wrapping themselves in flags, because you'll always see a flag wrapped around a fascist no matter whereabouts in the world. They love the iconography and very little actually addressing people's material
They're
needs.
The true patriots. They're the true patriots. It's just like here, the Republican Party, which is basically the MAGA party. Now, they've co-opted all the terms, patriot, freedom, but I see, those ideas being clawed back by the other side right now a bit, because, what is free about having no rights over your own body? They're taking away rights. They're not increasing rights. So, but I guess that's the thing. I don't see how anyone would ever be for, a decrease in human rights. But
well, I think that's interesting, because I think when the discussion around women's reproductive rights, it's not painted as a reduction in rights. It's painted as we're giving more rights to an unborn fetus, that we're assigning more rights to people. I don't believe that a fetus before the age of a certain stage is a viable person, that you would say. But the rhetoric that is spread around is we're giving more rights to people, rather than we're taking them away from a group of people. We're actually assigning rights to more people. And I think that's why a way to get a lot of people on board, that it's not a reduction, it's an increase.
Right.
The thing that always got me, the thing that always got me was it's rights for unborn babies in Texas or Alabama, but what rights did the kids and born kids in Iraq have when bombs were being dropped from drones on them, in Afghanistan and these places? It's interesting how they look at the sphere of which children deserve to live and which don't.
Exactly.
And also,
you could even take it down even further and say, okay, we're demanding that women, have more babies and all that, and we're going to protect these, little microscopic embryos and things over the woman's health. You know, we'll let her die, but she's like trying to have that baby. You know, but it's like, but then let's have these babies and then let's send them to school and let's let them all get shot. You know, I mean, today we've had another school shooting in Georgia and 30 people were shot. Several people have died. I don't know what the latest is, but is it Georgia? Yeah. It's just crazy. 4 killed, 30 injured so far.
Well,
And it's not even a common, I mean, it's a common story here. It's not even.
Yeah. George, you had a point there?
Well, I was just going to say that the very same people who seem to be obsessively, pro-life, as they would term it, don't, but they're not pro-life, they're pro-birth, because they don't give a shit about kids once they're born. They don't give a shit about hungry kids. They don't give a shit about funding education. They don't get, you know, it is not about outcomes. This is just about control.
Absolutely.
It's ridiculous. There should not be one hungry child on this planet. There's plenty of food. There's plenty of money. But I got one quick point. I know you're closing, Sean. I have to do a little woo-woo here. The astrologically speaking, the planets are at the exact alignment right now that they were at the time of the French Revolution. So now's the time for change. Even the stars say so.
We need all help we can get. If we can get some extra help from the planets, I'll take it. We need everything we can get to start to make a difference and improvement of people's lives, I think.
Amazing. Well, as Renee said, it's got too close to the hour mark. So it's been a pleasure having you all back in with me and discussing this stuff tonight, and hopefully everyone listening has enjoyed. We're going to do much better at being more regular now. As Laura's come on board, there'll be a lot more content put out with maybe fewer of us in each show, and hopefully a lot more broader and diverse sort of range of topics. So as always, if anyone's got any ideas for subjects, our email is whatsleftradio@gmail.com. If you want to support the show, we're on Patreon, patreon.com/whatsleftradio. And if you want to follow us on X or Twitter, we are at What's Left Radio. So thank you, everyone. Hope you've enjoyed, and we will see you soon.